Self-awareness is our ability to look backwards at something, analyze it, whereas self-awareness is more in the moment. Can we get to that self-awareness so we can do it immediately? So we can learn lessons in the moment or very shortly after?
Train somebody when they should be looking back or reflecting on their actions.
So much data now and historical context about the importance of journaling. Marcus Aurelius, thankfully we have his journals, but in this journal, I sort of express inner emotions about that, of the shame I might have felt in that moment when I know I shouldn't have raised my voice because that's not the type of parent I want to be. I want to achieve X outcome, and so I'm just gonna try and work through this systematically.
Right.
And exactly what we're trying to do with Transferable Everything, to use athletics and the broader world as a form of education, and you have to be intentional with that. So the chapter we would technically fall on is self-reflection.
Gotcha.
Because we've been trying to make this like a series, it supposes that everyone starts at the beginning and follows it sequentially like a Netflix show. But that's not actually going to be the case.
Sure. And when they don't, they're going to have to look back.
Hopefully. So I was like, is there a way to create a consistent intro that doesn't annoy anyone returning, but also informs anyone jumping in on this episode?
Right.
I don't know the answer to that yet. One of the things that I have to get over in my brain is speaking to the people listening, not just our conversation. Like, I think it needs to be a bit of both. One of the shortcomings, I think, on my part is not speaking enough to listeners, as well as, because it's almost like my brain hasn't accepted that
People are watching you?
people are watching. Maybe that's a defense mechanism. Maybe that's like an insecurity of...
Oh, that's kind of a good thing because you'll speak more freely, potentially.
Maybe. But I think maybe I speak a little more vague than I otherwise should as well. There's I'm speaking with certain assumptions. Because I'm speaking to you, we spoke so much for so long that I'm speaking with certain assumptions of knowledge.
Yeah, there's some grace and good faith in the conversation that sometimes what we're talking about isn't fully formed. We're working through ideas.
Yeah, that's right. And I think maybe making that a little more explicit in those moments.
Sure.
In any case, welcome back to the Transferable Everything podcast with your host, Daniel Schulteis and James Keating. So this week, the plan is for us to talk about self-reflection. Now, I just want to, speaking of self-reflection, I've been doing a lot of reflecting myself and thinking about the podcast episodes that we've dropped so far and looking at ways that I can improve, that we can improve. And one of the things that I think is most critical is some of the pauses, although those are for good reason because we're exploring a little bit, clarity of speech. And most importantly, probably the thing that needs the most work is making sure that when I'm speaking with enough clarity for anyone who's just listening for the very first time, rather than making certain assumptions, because we're having a regular conversation that you and I would normally have, and because it's exploratory between you and I need to be a little bit better at making sure that I break things down so the listeners can understand exactly what we mean by something, or and just not make so many assumptions.
Sure.
So I think that's a good segue into the topic for today, being self-reflection. And I'm really excited about this one because this is where a lot of the work kind of begins. This is where we can actually have some analysis. And it's probably important to start with the fact that there is a difference between self-reflection and self-awareness. So I want to start by explaining the difference between self-awareness and self-reflection. So for me, self-awareness is our ability to look backwards at something, analyze it, whereas self-awareness is more in the moment. We can be aware of something within ourselves as it's happening. And that's kind of the objective. So in the framework for Transferable Everything, self-awareness is kind of downstream to that's where we want to be. But we do have to begin with a level of self-reflection because we have to practice the the art of looking at ourselves in the mirror, analyzing ourselves. And in the previous podcast episodes, we talked about courage, we talked about humility. And these are really important virtues that we develop within ourselves so we can actually take the time to reflect properly and clearly and objectively. And so I just wanted to start with the distinction between both of those. So the notion of self-reflection, although we use the example of looking in the mirror, that's a little bit more to the point of self-awareness because the mirror is real time. We're moving and we're seeing ourselves move within the mirror.
Right.
However, self-reflection is, like I said, it's so similar, but it's just looking backwards, analyzing. And often when we do that, we have the ability to use hindsight. We have more time to analyze our decision making. Said in another way, this is sort of like the Monday morning quarterbacking or the armchair quarterbacking, analyzing decisions that are made very quickly, but with the addition of hindsight, some maybe added experience and time to process and think about these things. But it's not to dismiss the importance of taking that time, analyzing. I think that's where we end up having to provide or give ourselves some grace in recognizing that. And hopefully we extend that to others as well. And that's why failure and forgiveness is also downstream of this, a little closer to self-awareness. But self-awareness, again, being the end state that we want to achieve. I think most people, as they mature, they look backwards and they can analyze and reflect on their experiences. For some people, they might be able to do it weeks, months, or even a year later. For others, it might take 5-10 years where they can look backwards. And one of the premises of Transferable Everything is how can you do that without having to wait a year, 5 years, 10 years? Can we get to that self-awareness so we can do it immediately? So we can learn lessons in the moment or very shortly after, very critical ones, and we can adjust our behavior, our response to how our emotions are showing up in the moment or how they're expressed outwardly and so forth. And I think that's something that is critical in every aspect of our life, whether you're an athlete, whether you're an executive, whether you're an employee, a partner, a parent, being able to do that and shortening that gap between how long it takes you to learn that lesson from when it actually happened is really the goal.
Right. So it seems to be a case of really what or when does one trigger the act of self-reflection?
To me, it can be any time. I know a lot of people would say, you need to carve out time for self-reflection. And I think, sure, in a perfect world, if you can do that, great. And maybe for younger people that might have less responsibilities, that's a little bit easier for them to do. But I think for parents, career-focused adults, it's a little bit harder to carve out moments in your calendar. Now, if you can and you have that calendar discipline, amazing. But I also like to sort of work in the moment.
Right.
So I think there's times where you're thinking maybe it's on a drive to work, home from work, or you have a little bit of time to yourself, you're cleaning the garage, you're doing some laundry, and you can use these moments to kind of think through some things. Or there's a moment of inspiration from a podcast or a show you're watching or a conversation with a loved one, and that sort of prompts that. And I think in those moments, you should take that and kind of run with it. You should leverage that moment, that inspiration, and use that to kind of dissect. Now, if you can harness that and be strategic of when you do it and how frequently you do it, that's optimal.
Sure.
But trying to create the space to do it, however you do it, is, I think, the thing that matters most.
For someone who doesn't have, say, a regular self-reflection practice or they don't know when they need to look inward or to analyze a situation, like how can you make that seem like an attractive thing to do or train somebody when they should be looking back or reflecting on their actions?
It's kind of cliche now, but journaling, whether it's gratitude journaling, regular journaling, or however you want to frame journaling, the practice of journaling in of itself is an act of self-reflection.
Right.
The depth of how far you go is up to the individual.
Sure.
But the act in of itself is great. And I think we have so much data now and historical context about the importance of journaling. Marcus Aurelius, thankfully, we have his journals, which has given us a lot of insight to the human mind, even back then. And so if it was important then, and all of our psychologists are agreeing of its importance, there's continuity there. And so I know it's cliche, and sometimes for men, especially, it's looked at as like, well, that's like a 12-year-old girl's journal with a little key box lock, and maybe might struggle with how to express themselves. For me, one of the things I've done for journaling is I journal to my kids. So that makes it sort of real. I'm just speaking to them through this journal, and I use that as a tool for my self-reflection.
Right.
And analyzing how I felt in the past. It's a bit cathartic because I'm also, expressing to them some things that maybe I've done on my parenting journey that I'm not proud of. I raised my voice when I shouldn't have, and I've already apologized to them in person, but in this journal, I sort of express the more of my inner emotions about that, of the shame I might have felt in that moment when I know I shouldn't have raised my voice because that's not the type of parent I want to be. And then that does downstream help you get to the self-awareness, and we'll of course talk about that more, but that's where you end up being able to catch yourself, which I can definitely say I do. Whereas if I'm feeling like, okay, I want to raise my voice, I'm catching myself. No, that's not the parent I want to be. Sure. So if we go back to the beginning of agency, and then deciding the type of parent you want to be, courage, humility, self-reflection, I'm reflecting and reminding myself consistently that that's not the parent I want to be, and I'm writing it to them. Now, are they ever going to receive this journal from me? Maybe, maybe not. But it doesn't matter. It's a beautiful experience for me, and maybe for them to get to know me better one day, as a reminder of not who am I when they're looking at me through a new lens, but who was I when I was in my 30s and they were young, and so forth. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can explore this self-reflection. Yeah. And for me, that works. Or a young man, or woman, of course, but who doesn't have kids. It could be to your future kids. That I've encouraged a lot of young men who don't yet have kids, want to, and are very close to it, to explore journaling that way.
Yeah, I think what I was getting at is if there's an individual who can't recognize when they actually need to reflect and look backwards, or to reflect on something they've done, or reflect on an outcome, what could have been done better, what is like the lowest barrier of entry in order to start a reflection practice? And I do think journaling is very accessible. It's a very low barrier of entry.
And I think I understand what you're asking.
I mean, so I can do something, not me, I'm putting myself into like an avatar. I could do something that has very unpleasant consequences, but maybe I don't have the capacity to recognize that my actions resulted in that thing coming to fruition. So if I don't have the tools or the know-how to be like, maybe I should go think about the things that I've done. And it sounds really silly, but some people don't do that. They accept the consequences of their actions without thinking about how things could have been different.
Okay, so, and I think there's a lot of people that would fall into that category. And for that reason, that's kind of why I wanted to write the book, Transferable Everything, is because for people who might not instinctively or be open to getting to that place, the section that we're working through right now is about creating a framework, a system, a flow chart. So you can say, okay, well, I want to achieve X outcome, And so I'm just going to try and work through this systematically.
Right.
And so if your brain isn't working in that way, and now you could argue, well, if it's not working that way, they're not going to think that way. But if you can at least get somebody who says, I want X outcome, how do I get there? Or you say to someone, don't worry about the end result. It's the journey that matters. Cool. What does that mean? Here's what it means. If you can work through this flow chart step by step, systematically, then I think you can get there.
Sure.
And the point is that we should be reflecting on everything. Now, that sounds like a lot of cognitive power that you'd be putting towards reflecting on things. And of course, not every moment you can deeply reflect through everything. But I say that to say that the smallest things we experience deserve reflection, because we can learn the greatest lessons in the smallest things. We can learn the greatest lessons by reflecting on something we saw last week, something innocuous, something small. Animals grazing in a field can teach us a lot. And I think this is something that that we used to recognize or acknowledge, at least as far as I understand, many, many years ago. And I think we've kind of lost touch with that a little bit, the philosophical side of thinking. And we've become caught up in just sort of like a go, 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 go. And we don't afford ourselves enough time to sit back and think and observe the nuance and the beauty in the things around us and the smallest of experiences. I'm sure social media plays a bit of a part in that. Like, it doesn't count unless I've traveled to these 8 countries throughout Europe and I had this like beautiful experience. And I've been fortunate to have some of those. But I've also been fortunate to learn equally profound, important things in the smallest of experiences.
Right.
And my hope is to help people find that, how they can learn in the small. They don't need, 2 months in Europe backpacking across 8 countries to learn something that they could otherwise learn at home in their day-to-day life.
Right.
Yes, of course, there's a lot to learn in those experiences as well. But you don't have to.
Like what conditions does an individual need in order to be able to self-reflect? I know it sounds like a silly thing. Like anybody should be able to be like, okay, I was here in this situation. This happened. Now let's start unpacking the things. But there has to be like a level of intent in that.
Sure.
So like, I'm searching for something in order to get an answer. And self-reflection is what allows me to get closer to that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I guess like what is necessary for that individual to have in order to see that there's value in self-reflecting? I think you kind of said it, but is it ownership over an outcome, ownership over your circumstances?
It's an extreme ownership, I think. So this is where, Jocko's book, Extreme Ownership, hits the nail on the head. Because, and that's why we began with agency and choice. So we have to make a choice of what we would like to become. And it's just a decision. I would like to be kind. I would like to be athletic. I would like to be, what attributes and virtues would you like to have within yourself? You decide those, and then we begin this process. And so with the courage, so once we've chosen something, let's say kindness, okay? I want to be a kind person. And we actually just talked about this before we went live. And I think something confusing for a lot of people is we're not our thoughts, but we're our actions. So I want to be a kind person, therefore my actions need to be in alignment with someone who is kind. What would their actions look like? How would they respond in this situation that I'm in a kind way? And that's deeply nuanced, because sometimes we can do things out of kindness where we're just like, say for a parent, we're just giving everything to our kids. Like
Right.
It seems kind on the surface, but it's not actually kind, because then we rob them of their opportunity to teach them and prepare them for the world, which is more kind than just giving them the thing. So it is nuanced, and I don't want to oversimplify
Sure.
that kindness as just something so easy. But for the sake of this, we've decided that I want to be someone who's kind. Now I have to have the courage then to say, okay, now I need to look within myself. Am I kind? Can I say that I'm a kind person? Can I believe within myself that I'm kind? Now I have to have the humility to, once I've opened that inner citadel, to be like, I might find aspects of me that are not kind.
Right.
And not just in my thinking process, but in my actions with other people. And then I have to be open to reflect. Now I have to think about those. I have to sit with them and analyze them to say, yesterday with this person that I passed on the street, or my coworker, or my subordinate, or my boss, or my partner, or my kids, did I act with kindness? And so the act of self-reflection is to start to sit with those things and to really, really think about them. And then we move on to sort of like a critical thinking, attention to detail, where that's where we get into the nuance, and that's what'll be next. But for today, we're sitting with the thinking process, and we're starting to analyze. And so we're asking questions of ourselves. Did I act with kindness? Yes or no? Okay, it's nuanced. Okay, now work through that flow chart. Let me peel that apart a little bit.
Right.
To be fair, this is one of the things that's been so hard in writing this book, is I feel like each chapter I'm covering too much of the surface, and there's a lot more depth that I can continue to go into.
Sure.
But at the same time, there's accessibility, there's, and so I think there's probably room to continue to build into the future and elaborate on those things. So in self-reflection, we talk about the importance of it, but we could continue to peel it apart. There could be a 10, 12 step framework of how to sit with it. What are the variables that you need to ask of yourself, of the people around you? But in the end, we kind of return to the extreme ownership, where despite the variables, this is where you have to analyze what's within your control and what's not, ultimately, and separate the wheat and the chaff. And so you start to bucket as you're reflecting, okay, what can I control? What can I not? And then eventually you're sort of left with these two buckets. And then we get into the critical thinking step of, okay, now these are the things that are within my control, and let me start to pull these apart and analyze them even more.
Gotcha. I'm curious though, is it up to the individual to also decide what a thing is? So going back to your example, do I want to be a kind person? Do I define what kindness is?
Yeah, and that's an important question. I actually had a good friend of mine, email me after listening to our first episode, and that was kind of the essence of what he was asking. Now, it is, and unlike some of the other, philosophy, self-help type books, one of the things I didn't want to do was I didn't want to set forth what someone should strive to be like. Because I think that's too easy, and I didn't feel like, I feel like that's been done enough. And for me, I can look to the Bible. Others, they can look to Stoics, or whatever philosopher they want to look to, or historical figure and the story around that person.
Well, yeah, you want to help someone build their character, not give them a new one.
That's right. Exactly. Because I see that as a bit of a gap. I see that as something missing, where it's, a lot of us have said, this is what it looks like. Here's what the end state looks like. Right. This is what you can achieve. Be like this person. Here's what they believed in. Here's what they did. Here's some stories to help navigate it. But it's like, how do I get there?
Right.
And that's what I wanted to focus on. And maybe there's a place in the future of talking about, like, what does kindness really look like?
Right.
But for now, I kind of want to leave that work up to the individual.
Sure.
But once you determine
I don't think you could ever really determine that, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
context makes up a whole lot of what that ends up being.
Yeah. And I think that's what we miss today in some of our broader analysis or self-reflection / reflection of society, past societies. We don't we don't give enough grace. A lot of us have experienced that with our parents. We have the opportunity to reflect not only on ourselves, but we have the opportunity to reflect on our parents and, our experiences being raised by them and decisions they've made. And in many cases, we lack a lot of empathy and a lot of humility that we might give other people, but for some reason we won't give it to our parents. We forget that they were growing up at the same time we were growing up. Yeah. And the world that they grew up in as young adults looked very different from ours.
Sure.
And we forget that. The resources that we have available to us. I talk to my mom about this quite a lot because as a young parent myself, I have access to so much information that I can go on deep dives and I can look at, do you sleep train your kids? Do you co-sleep with them? And there's doctors and studies on both sides, and the depths of all of that is almost infinite.
Right.
When she was a young parent, she had sort of word of mouth, maybe some formal institutions that had flyers that they gave out with, a brief study or whatever was sort of oral traditions passed down from generation to generation.
Right. And
so, she said, "Oh, I wish I did this different. Oh, I wish I did this different." And, that's beautiful of her to think like that. But I can't imagine me holding anything against her that I thought she should do different because I'm doing it with my own kids, or I would do it with my children.
Sure.
Every parent says, well, my kid's not going to be a tablet kid and until they become a parent. It's like a running joke now on social media. All things are easier said.
Sure. Although there are some pretty damning studies coming out about screen time.
Sure.
I think that would go the same for people of our age as well.
Sure. Now, this is going to take us in a bit of a different direction, and I find this very fascinating. I love developmental psychology and so forth, but we can't run an inverse study or a parallel study of the opposite. So we can look at some of these damning studies about kids and screen time, but if they're going to grow up in a world that is very much in screens, virtual reality, all of these things, most of their work is going to be on screens. Even if they're, laborers in the field, are they going to have glasses with virtual reality in front of them? And what is it going to do to them if they're not prepared or inoculated to that much stimuli in their brain?
I'm a fully capable person of living within that framed reality, but I didn't have a tablet as a kid. So I don't think it's necessary either way.
Maybe, but we also don't know because you're right. Like we have,
I've got a virtual reality headset. I've got 3 monitors on my desk. I'm up to date with all the tech
today, but could it look even more futuristic?
Do we have any idea of what that's going to look like? I don't think we do.
No. So I only say that to say is that it might be an asset. We don't know definitively whether it's going to be entirely a hindrance. It could become an asset. I'm not 100% sure yet. Example, video games.
Right.
Our whole life growing up, everyone told us video games were going to be terrible for us. Now, people are making careers on video games.
Right. And
there's studies out about surgeons being 30% better surgeons when they play video games. And so, there's a contrast to what we thought would happen and then where we ended up. Not to bring us back to the schooling thing, but Alex and I were recently watching a show, and it's like a high school type show that takes place in like the mid 2000s, 2007, 2008, which was the same time that I was graduating high school.
Right.
And it was so interesting because the premise of this one episode that we were watching was that like I have to get into university. All these characters. And if I don't get into university, like that's it. My life's over. Like, and I sort of laughed, but I remember that experience and that thinking process when I was that age. And that's sort of how everyone around me was. And I laugh now because it's hilarious to think that like at 18, if you didn't achieve X, then, it's all over.
Right.
There's so much life to live. There's so much opportunity to go back to school, to not go back to school, like all of these things. But everyone was so certain, from the institutions to the parents to the content or the shows people are watching on TV, of this notion that if you don't get in,
Right.
that's it. And so I used those experiences to remind myself that, like, yes, there's a correlation with screen time, but also we've thought this many times, and what we found downstream was different.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
That makes sense.
I'm not a child psychologist. I haven't read
Totally.
those papers, haven't been involved in any of it. It's a new thing,
Yeah.
right? Being able to put a screen into a very young person's hands. So the fallout of that could be anything. I guess we'll know when we know.
Yeah. No, I think, of course, there's like guardrails protecting the outside world from coming in.
Sure.
But that's true whether they're on a screen or whether they're in the playground or whatever. Like, that's your job as a parent, is the guardrails, regardless of the domain that it's in.
Right.
But I also should say, like, I think there's a lot of people that are starting to back away now from the cry it out method, putting their kids in another room.
Could you tell me more about that? It's
co-sleep.
something I'm not.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, because this is what I'm guilty of glazing over so quickly. For parents, for probably 20 years, a lot of the experts have been talking about putting your kids in a separate room. They can cry it out, and it's going to teach them resilience. It's going to teach them emotional regulation and all of these things. There's this, correlated studies, but correlation doesn't equal causation. For anyone who doesn't understand
Could you explain
that means.
that?
Yeah. So you can correlate a study, but it doesn't mean, so that means, like, you're seeing an outcome and you're attaching it to something that is pretty consistent within a behavior. So I don't know if I'm doing that justice, but causation is, we know definitively that this outcome is caused by this behavior or taking this medicine or whatever the case may be. And correlation is a much looser version of that. It's like, we're seeing some consistent things happening here, and this is also an outcome within these two groups. So we think that this could be tied to this. And I think too often when it comes to correlations, we look at them more definitively, because we're creating a correlation in a study. And so it's the scientific method, but, like, it's not definitive. It's not, that's all it is we're correlating it.
Do you think it's incorrect to make decisions or changes in your life based purely off of correlation as opposed to no information at all?
No, I think you can use correlation, but I think we neglect a lot of instinct as well. I think we're given a lot of instincts that can inform us as well. Things that, especially in parenting, things that feel more natural and not. Like, it feels very unnatural to just let your kid in a room around the corner scream and cry because they're upset because all they want is their parent. And a study is telling you, like, ignore that. So you're ignoring this instinct inside of you. Now, that's not always true, because what I was saying earlier about giving your kids things, but it could be an instinct to sort of, like, be an overbearing, devouring mother, if you will.
Right.
So that could be instinctual for some, although I do think that many parents do have the instinct of wanting to teach rather than sort of overbear. But I think that all of this comes from a reflective process of thinking through where is this feeling coming from? Where is this instinct coming from? And so if I return back to that, the cried out method and some of those correlative studies, now I'm starting to see studies where and these did exist, but they're becoming maybe a little bit more mainstream, of, like, well, when you use the cried out method for babies, it spikes cortisol. They have less trust in their parents because they're abandoning them into another room. And there's all these things that are happening. So it's like the health and fitness industry, where you end up, there's two competitive ideas that end up we're wrestling with, and the loser really is the person that's trying to analyze them. And I think sometimes you can look at them, take them for what they are, and then I think in many cases it's best to kind of go with a bit more of an instinct, especially when it's just a correlation. But it's
So
important
could your personal instinct not just be a correlation too?
It could be.
Yeah, I wanted to pull it back actually to reflection with causation and correlation.
Yeah.
With somebody who is reflecting, how do they draw the line between determining if it was correlated or a cause when you're trying to figure out why something happened the way it did?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. It's hard because when you're reflecting, we also have like a cognitive bias, self-justification, cognitive dissonance, which, they're synonyms of one another really. And what that means is that our brains can kind of trick us into doing something and convincing us that we should do this ultimately because it's the thing that we want. Maybe it's the easiest for us to do. And so we can kind of cut a corner by just kind of doing this, and we can convince ourselves. And that's something that we really have to guard against. And that's been something that's been hard to talk about in the book because, I'm sort of even now in saying that maybe that should be its own chapter because it probably is worth really exploring that. Now, I touch on it, but maybe I don't do it enough justice because it is a real challenge for most of us. Being objective is hard. And
sure.
And we've talked about this before, sort of becoming the observer, a metacognition of seeing ourselves. Now, the problem is in a self-reflective state, we're at the beginning of this framework, and sort of self-awareness, metacognition is where we want to get to.
Yeah.
But if we need that at the self-reflective state, it's kind of hard because then we're sort of cut in, well, how do we get there without the thing to begin with? And I totally appreciate that. And so I think that's where the next step in the critical thinking becomes really, really important. And we have to be objective. And okay, that's so easy to say. How do we be objective? I could easily say, okay, we go back to that metacognition. But I think the best way is, one, if we have the courage and the humility, then we don't have to feel like something's hurting our ego if we've made a mistake. And that's where a lot of cognitive dissonance comes in. We want to protect ourselves from having to face the fact that we've made a mistake or we should have done something different. And that's hard. And that's where the courage and humility, and why I think it comes first before we get to this phase. It's because I think if you can really deploy those and you don't have to worry about your ego being injected into that, then you can start that process earlier. And so you can start to then reflect. The other thing is to try and surround yourself with people that hopefully think in some of these terms.
Right.
People that are objective, that are willing to be honest with you, even if it hurts your feelings.
Sure.
That's really important, because then I could say, James, here's a scenario that I'm dealing with. I really need your opinion. This is what I'm thinking. But I also have to be honest with you. I have to give you all the information. I can't guard things because that's a passive version of cognitive dissonance.
Right.
I have to give you everything so you can tell me with all context, with all information, this is what I think, even if it's going to hurt me. And I have to be able to do that. Now, it's hard to find people in your life like that. Oftentimes when we're looking for friends or family or people we put ourselves around, for most of us, it's about what do we have, what interests do we share?
Right.
You like jiu-jitsu, I like watching soccer. So like, what are we going to talk about? I have kids, you don't yet have kids. So like, we've got nothing in common. But if I use you as this use case in a relationship with me, we have so much in common because what really matters is the undercurrents. And this is also what transferable everything is about. Most of my friends and the people I try and surround myself with are people who focus on character and virtue and have those things. It's not, do we share are we both Manchester United fans? Do we both love soccer? And we can talk about, Champions League this week or whatever. And those are great too. But you have to have a mix of both of those. And then that's where the courage and humility, I'm submitting to trusting you, just like you would a doctor.
Yeah.
I've talked about this before, like where I've had to submit as a patient to the prescriptive exercises or treatment plan set forth by medical professionals. And I kind of have to submit to that and see how that goes. And you kind of have to do that as well at this stage with people around you.
Sure. It's also they're unique relationships, and I would say in some ways ours is one, in that in one of the frameworks we operate in, you're my de facto boss.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of an interesting dynamic there when it comes to speaking as freely as I do.
Sure.
But I guess like on my part, there is a bit of courageousness required, because I know that, hey, maybe someday I am going to say something that's not going to land the way I intended it to.
Sure.
But you've also put a lot of trust in me as well. And there's a humility and a willingness to hear me out. And really, it's up to you to decide. And I know you're someone who's got the toolbox, but you can decide whether or not what I said was legitimate. And to be fair, you're going to challenge me if you disagree anyway, which is going to help me grow. So there's kind of like a back and forth that's lifting us both up.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, despite the fact that, outside of this, that's how our relationship is, the same dynamic would be true, as just a friendship.
Sure.
Not that one's, a boss over the other, but there's moments where, someone's going to the other for information, one's seeking from the other, and so forth. But principally it's the same thing. And the ideal place is where you can sort of wrestle with ideas together. But yeah, if I'm the leader of the organization, then yeah, it's still my job to sort of go to you for those things. I know that you're going to be honest. You're going to give me feedback, but then I still have to distill that down amongst all of the other data points that I have. And that's also why developing these things are so critical for a leader. And this is why, a big part of the premise is that character and virtue are more important than any technical mastery. Because I can be surrounded by all of the experts. Every leader can do that. You can hire people that are experts of any specialty, but your ability to sift through all of the data that they're giving you, that's not a technical mastery. That's virtues and character and a toolbox inside of you that you can utilize it from empathy, which doesn't have a chapter in the book, but I have to be able to empathize. I have to be able to contextualize everything around me. And that's not just in business leadership, that's in coaching sports and athletics, that's in being a parent. Your kid comes home from school and says, this happened to me at school. Okay, don't immediately take it at face value. Start to ask some questions before your cortisol spike and your fight or flight because, this kid pushed your child or hit them. Start to ask some questions.
Sure.
Control that. Now, if you discover that, this is, egregious bullying or something, then you might benefit from some of that spike to give you a bit of fire and passion to go toe to toe and handle it in a way that's productive and it needs to be handled.
Sure.
And so it's important. But until you get to that spot, controlling that fight or flight spike, that's really important. You got to be objective, ask the questions, contextualize. But before you know the right questions, you also have to have reflected and practiced reflection.
Sure.
Because that's what gives you the tools to know what to ask of them. You're sort of like de facto self-reflecting for them through the Socratic method of asking questions and so forth.
Sure. With like kids or people who don't have the language to kind of like break down what happened.
Yeah.
Outside of controlled environments, I don't condone violence, but I think I was rightfully struck by other people as a younger person for acting or speaking a certain way. But I get the same kind of strike just verbally now from my close friends who are willing to call me out over something.
Right.
When you're a younger person, maybe you don't necessarily know how to challenge somebody's actions with words. And that's why people potentially result to violence. That's not a conclusion, just an observation. But in any case, yeah, I get monster value out of like my close friends and a lot of the people I associate with, because they are willing to be frank with me and call me out. And likewise, I do the same for them, whether or not they like it.
Yeah, and to me, that's actual kindness. If we bring it back to the kindness example, that's being kind. Because if I want the best for you as your friend, I need to call you out. So if I'm just watching you go down this path or just making, too many mistakes, even overtly, that's not beneficial to you.
No.
It's not going to help you get where I know you want to go. And so kindness then looks a lot different than maybe how most of us think. But I think you brought up a really good point as well. And we've used the word quite a lot, language. And you had just mentioned that, maybe a lot of times for kids, but also for adults, where they use violence because there's a lack of language that they have, or maybe an understanding of their own emotions and feelings. And so amongst everything else, being able to control that, however you figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Whatever level of thinking, whether it's trying to use the framework that we're, putting out there, or, another method, having language to express yourself is so important, because that gives you the tool to begin there. There's going to be times where you have to use violence, sure. But having the language first and foremost is so important. And then also that's where you can apply empathy. And so this is one of the things that, I'm sure I'm going to be talking to my children about is, if somebody is resorting to violence in the schoolyard and, it's not critical to their safety, it's just sort of how the kid is responding, then I want to help them understand too that, maybe they, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad child or that they have any behavioral issues. It doesn't even mean those things. It could just mean that they just don't yet know how to express their emotions.
Sure.
They don't have the language for it. And so we can always be empathetic. Now, that doesn't mean let someone push you around all over the schoolyard in sort of the sad suicidal empathy kind of card. But at least beginning to know where things might come from allows you, and you need empathy for that, allows you to then sort of select a solution or a response that might be the most appropriate to the scenario.
Right. And there are also many other ways people can react when they don't have that language. I'm sure in a business setting, you've seen people either choose silence over speaking in a meeting, or choosing many words,
Yeah.
or leaving that meeting altogether, for instance, because I think there are two things happening in parallel. One is they don't have the language to express themselves, or they're being overcome with emotion because they feel they're not getting the result that they want. And so those things they come to a head. You can have the language, but if the emotion is overriding your ability to express those things, then you need to work on also checking your emotion and understanding that you're not always going to have complete control over an outcome, particularly in a business setting. And I'm sure we've said this in the other podcasts, but there's a whole lot that you can control in any given situation. And I feel you're much more likely to have an impact on, say, a broader decision-making process if you are able to quell those emotions and be reasonable and speak freely.
Absolutely. You actually touched on something that I wanted to bring this back to, is you had said that you might not be getting the result that you want because of your inflated emotions. And I think that's kind of important. That kind of brings us back to the beginning of like agency, decision, and choice. And it's first knowing what is the outcome that you want in a situation. Mm-hmm. So do you want to be right? Or do you want to discover what's true? Or do you want to help the benefit of the company in a meeting? Or do you just want to be seen as the person that's right? And so that if you just want to be seen as the person that's right, then you're going to have to fear that you could be wrong.
Correct.
Because it creates tension between what you ultimately want and what the the opposite of that might be. However, if you've made a choice that I just want to help the organization or my family or my friends, or I just want to achieve this outcome of I want to discover what's true, regardless of whether it comes from me, somebody else, and so forth, then you're not going to be overcome with emotion. So even if you don't yet have the greatest control over your emotions, you've not sort of mastered that emotional regulation yet, you can also decide what the outcome is that you want and then make that your focal point.
I was hoping to pull that whole self-reflection and outcomes back into athletics, and I think it's something you can speak to obviously a lot better than I can. But in business and in sports, we often have a team dynamic where you don't necessarily have sole control over an outcome, but you have complete ownership over your part as a team member. So I was hoping you could speak to the ways in which maybe not properly regulating your emotions or wanting to take complete egotistical control over an outcome in a team environment can play out in sports.
I'm definitely...
There's a whole lot there.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I'm a good person to speak to that because learning emotional regulation has been a challenge for me, especially around athletics. And I think we talked about this previously, but because there's a dichotomy and or a paradox, if you will, and this is where you need a certain amount of passion in order to really strive to win a game. You have to hate losing so much. You have to want to win more than anything. And this fire that burns inside of you, I believe that's necessary. And I definitely had that. And then now it's gone too far. So there's a tension there. It's this tightrope that you have to learn to walk. I don't think a lot of people or enough people talk about that tightrope. They just see this line has been crossed, and so therefore this passion is bad. And that's not true either. We shouldn't try and put a blanket over that flame inside of a young athlete or anyone for that matter. It's just about finding out how to harness it, giving it its own guardrails. And that's a lot harder to do. It's so nuanced to walk this line. And I think part of that, learning that process, is understanding how your emotions that sort of expand that much no longer become a thing that's serving you, and now it's a thing that's hurting you.
Right.
There's many different instances of this beyond athletics, but the thing that's giving you that passion can hurt you, and so understanding where is that line requires reflection. So this is where I'm going to be the most guilty. Is I'm playing a game. I want to win so bad, and the ref makes a poor call in a critical area that costs us a goal. Okay, is the ref at fault? Maybe. Let's say they are. Okay, fine. So you want to hold them accountable? Sure, that's fair. But will that actually contribute to your end goal, or will it make it harder? The reality is it's probably going to make it harder, because if you lash out at the ref and now you're poking at their ego, what's going to happen downstream?
Right.
5 minutes later in the game, 10 minutes later in the game, are they going to, where there's kind of like a 50-50 call, are they going to give it to you? Or after you've just attacked their ego, do you think they're more likely to call it against you, not call it at all of those things? Now, are they supposed to be fair, objective, despite if you say something to them and it didn't warrant a yellow card, but you said it anyways? Yeah, of course, but you have to understand, and this is one of those beautiful nothing new type Stoic sayings, is you need to find the world as it is, not as you wish it was.
Right.
And that's the world as it is. The reality is that ref might and is likely going to not give you that call or call it against you because of what you've done. And so learning to understand some of those things and reflect and think about the consequences downstream before they happen, before you react. And that's kind of the self-awareness you want to get to. For some people, that comes with maturity at different stages in their life. Other people, that level of self-awareness never arrives, regardless of age. But I think the idea here is that you can achieve it, and you can maybe achieve it faster with intention,
Right.
and applying intentionality to it. And so I think for me, that's one of the things that's been hardest for me. I've been able to see it in other scenarios, but because I've been so passionate about the game and wanting to win, and again, it's served me, as other things have in my life, things that have served me, and they turn out to be now a hindrance.
Right.
And that's something that, you know, I've had scenarios, and I'll probably talk about this a little more, of where, you know, grit and resilience have been such a pivotal part of my life. But if that's so rigid that you can't adapt, then the grit and resilience you have is no longer going to serve you in those moments, because you're pushing through a point where that's not, you should be moving left or right. And I just did that backwards. But you should be moving left or right, and instead of continuing straight. And so even grit, even resilience can serve you until it doesn't. But you need to reflect on those things. You need to think about them deeply and really try and piece them apart. It's not, you know, do this, build this, this is the outcome. And it's great for motivational speakers and people to talk about these one-dimensional things of like, you know, just be gritty, just go. No one loves Goggins more than me. Who's going to carry the boats? But there's nuance with inside of that level of grit and resilience that needs to be factored in and thought about.
Yeah, it's also funny, returning quickly just to the soccer example and an ego and emotional attachment. When you think about the spectator, who literally has a bird's eye view of the game, who can maybe see things unfolding a little better than the players can sometimes because they have a full view, strategic full view, and yet fans on opposing sides can have a completely different interpretation of what a call actually is because of emotional attachment.
Yes.
So it got me wondering about, I know we've spoken about this, and again, another shout out to Mr. Holiday, but ego truly being the enemy, particularly when it comes to self-reflection.
Yeah. I think we talked about it previously, but there is nuance within that I had to work on myself. Some of the audacity, like it can't just be ego is the enemy. We need a certain amount of it at certain times.
Of course.
And so it's always a matter of deploying the right tools at the right time for the right job. There's actually a newest chapter that I've included in the section 3 is about how to select the right tool for the right job.
Cool.
In terms of character and virtues. And so, but in this case, ego can absolutely be the enemy because it inhibits you from looking at something objectively. So in the use case you're describing, as a spectator, I'm a Manchester United supporter, diehard, love them. So if they're playing a game against Liverpool or Manchester City or you know, a historic rival, and the ref makes sort of a 50-50 call.
Right.
I have to recognize that I'm probably emotionally going to lean towards my team.
Of course.
Unless, and I've had this experience happen, to be fair. I have to stop for a second, recognize that in my mind. I have to return to, what do I want out of this analysis? And what I want is to discover what's true, regardless of whether it hurts, regardless of whether it attacks my ego, regardless of whether it hurts my team, which I never want to see hurt. And we've suffered a lot lately. But I want that more than I want them to win the game.
Right.
And so it's building a bit of a hierarchy of needs or wants, if you will. And I think that has to be, for all of us, at the top. But then, even when you put that at the top, there's still cognitive dissonance. There's still things that can creep in. But when you make that your number one priority, and truly, and not just a statement, like it has to be true within your heart.
Right.
Like, as much as I love Manchester United, and growing up, I was the kid that like they could lose Champions League final, and I'm gonna cry over a team.
Right.
That's my emotional attachment to Manchester United. However, truly in my heart, I got to a place in my life, probably my mid to late 20s, where my hierarchy leads with, I want to know it's true. Above all else.
Right.
And so I think that conscious choice allows me to put that first, and that sort of, in a way, helps to kill the ego inside of me and my emotions, because I do want that more than anything.
Right. I'm going to be stepping a little out of my lane here, because while I have played and I've watched my fair share of footy, I'm nowhere near as involved as you are. So I want to talk about high-level soccer or sports in general, where you have elevated stakes, where maybe a good call or a bad call is the results in rather winning a game or a championship or getting you to a next stage and so forth. But I also know it's one of the most popular sports on the planet. It's got huge cultural impact.
Yeah.
So if you have two high-level respected players who are maybe lying about whether or not a call went a certain way, like say the ball goes out, both guys are putting their hands up.
Yeah.
Both of them know whose ball it is.
Yeah.
But there's kind of a performative thing where they're adding a bit of delusion to the situation in order to give their team a competitive edge where possible.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm getting at is with the cultural impact, it's these people are demonstrating that it's okay to do in certain scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good scenario to kind of peel apart. And I think there's a lot baked into that. Because like you said, it's cultural.
Sure.
Right? And as a player, as much as we struggle with officials, referees,
Sure.
they're the people that we've put in there to be objective. So they're akin to a friendship of somebody that can be objective. By recognizing that we're so in the dark with the blinders on that I want to win at all cost, and I know that as soon as I step on the pitch, that's how my brain's working. Well, I need guardrails, because I'm going to be doing everything I can to get an edge to try and win this game. And so that's what the officials are there for, is to kind of be that objective observer, because, even myself, who tries to practice a lot of these things, to have that level of metacognition and observe myself as I'm playing, it's impossible.
Right.
And so right tool, right job, and surrounding yourself with a support mechanism. Obviously the game requires officials, so I'm not sort of consciously making a decision myself.
Yeah.
But in the exact same way that we've determined that they're necessary, is the exact same way that that objective friend that's willing to tell you the thing you don't want to hear is necessary. The game can't be played without officials, as much as that pains me to say. No. And we can't navigate life without surrounding ourselves with objective friends that can help us. And I'm super grateful. I see myself as somebody who has been so fortunate to be surrounded by people from family, friends that can really call me out, that I can go to and I can ask questions, and they're gonna shoot me straight. They're gonna say it like it is, and they're gonna give me, many times they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but it's still necessary to hear it. it becomes, even if it's just thought provoking. And so I see that in the same way. But I think players are supposed to be like that on the field. Like I think there's an argument for that.
Yeah, it's a compromise.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's necessary. You need it's the same sort of tightrope.
So if we
walking.
pull that to like children's athletics, how would you teach that?
Yeah. Okay. Now that's a beautiful question. I think this is actually where, I mean, I'm romanticizing this because of television and stuff like that. I've recently become a football fan.
Like American football.
American football.
Okay.
Yeah. And they seem to have a lot more discipline baked in. It's a bit more of a rigid sport, at least as far as I understand it. Soccer is a little bit more fluid, creative, different mindset, of course. But how again, romanticizing this, but how I see them doing a lot of things, like really holding the line on discipline and character, I think is exactly what needs to be done in child athletics across the board, right? Like, and picking on the little things. If you're doing wind sprints, making sure, like one of the best things a coach can do is not do wind sprints so they can see who the fastest player is or whatever. One of the best things that a coach can do is hold that line and watch the placement of their foot. Who cares who's finishing first? It's development. Develop the character. Hold the line on the foot. Don't stand back here. Say, okay, you're going to do a 5-yard sprint to this line, back, and then all the way through here, and I'm going to see who won. It does nothing. No developmental value there. Zero. It's not even a predictor of who's going to become the fastest player in 5 years. Zero. What is a predictor is, are they touching the line every time? And if they're not, you have to hold them to touching that line. That changes everything. And everything in youth sports should pull from that exact scenario. Hold those lines, because that's what's going to build the character. And when you do that, that's the intentionality we're talking about. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have, Daniel and James come speak at, a youth event and
Right.
talk about all of these things. That's nice. But you can add intention directly into your training session by doing that alone. It's a shift from one to the other, because you're showing these children and their brains the thing that matters most.
Right.
And so when in the development years, if it's who gets across the line as the coach is standing there holding their arms out, then the thing that matters most isn't whether they have the integrity to touch the line and they're just standing there waiting for them to run through, or who wins, the inter squad game at the end. It's who played in the way that the coach is asking.
Right.
So I've seen a couple of really great coaches. I had one on the podcast, Stevie, brilliant coach, because in his training sessions, I observed this so many times, he would teach a skill, and then you'd go into a game. He could care less which team won, which team had what player in his inter-squad game at the end of the training session. All he wanted to see was the players trying to use the skill they learned in that training session, even if it meant them losing the ball and the other team scoring. I saw this with my brother, with his coach Rohan, and he's my brother's a goalkeeper, and so he gave him direction in this small-sided game as a goalie, where he said when he received a back pass, he wanted him to hold the ball an extra second or two, because he wanted to draw the striker in, and then he wanted to split the strikers, so split the lines into the midfielder with a pass. So then now you've already split the lines and you can kind of counterattack a lot more efficiently. So using the goalkeeper in the buildup of play, instead of them just making a nice side pass over here, it's nice and safe and so forth. And so I'm watching this, and this is my first time showing up to this training session. And so my brother holds the ball for an extra second. What happens? Striker strips him the ball. He's on the goal line. Boom, goal.
Oof.
It's happened like 2 more times.
Yeah.
And I'm watching the coach, and he just keeps encouraging him. Nope, try again, try again. And the other team's scoring. So this is like an inter-squad game. And I just thought, this is brilliant. This is something that's very rare to see. And I told my dad, I was like, you have to do a lot of training with this guy. This is brilliant, because this is what helps players develop, because he's teaching him not just the skill, but he's teaching him that the development matters more than the outcome of this game right now.
Right.
And that's a beautiful thing. When I see those things, and it's in athletics, but when I see that everywhere in parenting and education, where, if we bring it back to education, it's not just, what does the Scantron say, or the multiple choice test at the end, but we've conditioned everybody that that's what matters. But the actual thing that matters is, what did you learn along the way? Like, truly learn, not what you memorized in order to pass or to get a particular grade. What did you retain? What are you actually going to learn and take with you long term? And there's a tension between those objectives. And so for me, that's the most important.
Right on. This is something we can probably speak about on later podcasts, and I'm only saying that because I don't want to get it wrong. But you were explaining to me about the in-game drill, essentially, that he was doing. Reminded me of something I've seen in martial arts that's called the ecological method, or like constraints-based training. Again, I'm not an expert by any means. I'm not even a novice. But effectively, it's putting yourself in a very specific constraints-based game where you spend a lot of time doing that one specific thing in like a simulated, actual, real-world. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so the way a high-level training session would work is exactly that. You would create these, like you would maybe practice it in a walkthrough, talk-through. Then you would create a high-stakes simulated version. So you would, say, compartmentalize the pitch to that space where that action might happen, and then create some of the conditions that would otherwise exist in a real game.
Sure.
And so that's typically the best way to do this. But then you end the training session maybe with like a very tight sort of like, game. On a big field, you would see this where like they bring the other large net to sort of like the top of the other 18-yard box. So it's like this really condensed, like pretty much everyone, including the goalkeepers, can shoot on the opposing goalkeeper. It's very tight. You're moving very quickly. Or just like a larger inter-squad game. And so what often happens is, once you get to that moment, everything goes out the window, and it's just about who wins that inter-squad game. Not repeating the action in a real game scenario.
Right.
Even though you've created most of the conditions similar to that, you still need it sort of mapped, unfolding in a game scenario.
Sure.
Where, because you can only recreate most of the variables, not all of them. And you need to see like, oh, this is where this applies at this stage in the game, or this level of build-up. Because it's also a decision-making thing, right? So, for example, if I go back to the one with my brother, right? If they're winning 2-0, that's not a good risk to take.
No.
Right?
Sure.
So, and that's one of the really unique things about soccer. And it's one of the things that I love. It's very much a player's game. Unlike American football, which you can make the case that it's like a coach's game, because they're calling a lot of the shots and the decision-making in many ways. Not all, of course, but in many of the scenarios. It couldn't be further from the truth in soccer, even though managers are trying to control a little bit more. But so the player developing has to learn not just the skill, but also when to apply it.
Right.
Right tool, right job.
Sure.
Right? And so, you're down 1-0. Yeah, invite that pressure. Let them come in, split the lines, and hopefully you're giving your team an opportunity. Now, you have to be, you have to practice it enough that you're confident that you know exactly when to make that decision, when to, split the strikers coming in or wherever the pressure is, so you can get past those lines and counterattack. But, 2-0 up, 3-0 up, you no longer take that risk. You're definitely going to take a more safe route, unless your coach tells you otherwise, which might be silly. You might say, well, I want to play this way at all cost. But then I probably would have a conversation. And I've seen managers, the one that was most recently let go from Manchester United, wanted to play a particular way at all cost. I'm not a manager at that level. However, for me, there's clear indications that, there's ego tied into playing a particular way because it's my idea.
Right.
Rather than saying, let's play this way for now. Let's adjust this way because this is going to work under these circumstances, these conditions. And then let's adjust, iterate throughout the game, or depending on the team we're playing, and so forth. That scenario of my brother bringing, as a goalkeeper, allowing the pressure to come in. Well, if it's not a high pressing team, you're just going to be standing there for a long period of time waiting for someone to kind of casually come in.
Yeah.
And so it's a different tool at a different time.
In your experience in these teams environments, did you have coaches who were like trying to break your ego down a little bit? Not in like a malicious way, but I guess what I'm getting at is, in the same way we've both benefited from having very frank, honest friends who are willing to call us out. Was that like pervasive in like the team cultures that you played on? No?
No, I wouldn't say so. And I had some great coaches, but I don't know there was a lot of intentional character building, at least as far as I can tell. I'd love to hear differently from them and some examples.
Yeah.
But as far as I can tell, no. Everything was about winning. And so the scenario I shared about myself, or the experience of like me being so passionate, that was reinforced. That behavior was reinforced by every coach I had from 12, 13 onward. And in many ways, rightfully so, though today, I would suggest that mentality is probably reserved a little more for like 16, 17, 18. But I'm happy that I had that. Although, of course, if I was to work with a coach, I would work completely different with them. And I think, so many things are Venn diagrams and not binary. You don't have to be one or the other.
Yeah.
Again, right tool for the right job. There can be a moment where you need to inject that passion as a coach to the players, and you really need them to be using that tool, and you can help with that. And other times you need them thinking a little more critically, a little more reflectively, and you can help them on that journey. And I think that's how you ultimately develop the best players. Problem is, for coaches, and I'm sympathetic to that, is the incentive structure for coaches is wins. And, this is kind of the Charlie Munger thing, which is like, what's his phrase? Like, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. I hope I'm not misattributing that to Charlie Munger, but you get the idea anyways.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't want to just make that, I don't want to say that this is a coach's fault, but this is something for us more broadly to think about in society. And I think this is where leaders have to have a lot of courage.
Yeah.
So you can only imagine that if you're the leader of a club, and you would have to have so much courage to say to your coaches from 9 to 15, I could care less if you come last place. Because how else do you evaluate your managers?
Right.
Well, it could be the success of your players. Well, how can I evaluate them? That's 5-6 years down the road.
Yeah.
I need a metric that's now. And so the metric is the finite game of soccer. 90 minutes is up, or however many minutes your game is at whatever age, and it's a win or a loss. It's binary.
Right.
It makes it easy. So if I was to call out anyone that can affect change in this space, it's whoever's leading a club, to have the courage to make player development of skill and mastery, players' development of character, the actual end goal. And a lot of them will say it. But you can say anything. Just look at the actions. If you're not intentionally building in frameworks or resources or focused sessions on those things, is it a priority? And so, yeah, it takes a lot of courage for them. And so the rare few that do that, that's beautiful. It can make me cry.
Right.
Because I truly believe that that's what's in the best interest of every young athlete, both technically and personally for them.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
You've framed it in the past where your aspirations and your goals effectively made soccer your life.
Yeah.
But you just a moment ago described it as being a finite game.
Yeah.
Was it ever framed that way to you?
No.
And the reason why I say that, when we're talking about all of the things you can learn in one area and be able to transfer and move that over to another, pulling back to the example of like two players, play happens, both of them throw their hands up. At a young age, were you taught to vouch for yourself, even if you're wrong, to give your team the advantage?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And so how do you not ingrain that in a young mind and have it be something that carries over to other domains? I guess that's what I was asking when I asked you how you would teach that particular thing to a child. Because like you said, the game is finite. It's over in 90 minutes. But for many of them, and like yourself, it was their life.
Yeah. So you touched on something that is one of the hardest things to, in a way, unlearn. Either unlearn or recognize its applicability of where it matters and where it doesn't. And maybe 99% of the time, that's the wrong thing to do in every other domain. In this one, maybe it is. And maybe it isn't too. I'm not sure 100% where I land on that. But I think that's where the intention comes in of the training, the development, and then the reflection. And so if we return to the choices and the agency that we have over who we want to be, it's not that we carry everything from one domain to another.
Sure.
We still have to sort through the things that are valuable. And not everything is valuable.
Right.
This is actually a really interesting point because I don't know if I've been that explicit about this in the book. And so I might have to return to that.
Yeah, if I were to blow it up and take like an extreme approach to it, it's what you're teaching could be interpreted as win at all costs, even if it means compromising your integrity.
Yeah.
Now that it does make sense within the confines of the game, because if everybody's doing it, you're simply evening the playing field.
Yeah.
However, if that becomes habit and something you do, and maybe you move to another domain, you're thinking, well, win at all costs, even if it means compromising my integrity. Obviously, you and I aren't going to solve this in a single podcast, but what approach can we take when interfacing with young athletes to teach them that, hey, like maybe as simple as being upfront, it makes sense within the confines of this game because this game is finite and there's more to it beyond that. But I mean, like, as you said, things certainly can get off track where you treat it as, this is my goal, I'm going to make it to the top no matter what.
Yeah. I'm really happy you brought this up because we haven't quite explored this, off camera. And I think this is something that I explicitly need to put in the book. And this is something that I struggled with because when I went on this journey for myself, I had to reevaluate everything that I was taught. And sometimes we have lessons that we carry with us that we don't realize we're carrying with us.
Right.
Right. And so to that point, one of the things I've learned, and this is a later chapter, which is alignment, which is being in alignment, your actions and your values. And this is something that would contradict those things. And so I think how you solve this, well, one, it either has to be that you never teach it, period. And so we say in the finite game of soccer, you never do that. And that would be true for diving. That would be true for, over embellishing a foul. And the reason they do that is because they weren't fouled, but they need to demonstrate that they were.
Sure.
In a way that the ref will notice.
If the ref didn't catch it, I'll play it up.
Yeah. Yeah. So, even if there's justifiable reasons, so you could say, well, like never do that, ever, and that might be easier, maybe, I don't know, because there's probably instinct within your players that are going to do those things, or you end up welcoming a player that was taught that in their developmental years, and like, what are you going to do? Not have that player because they're predisposed to that and taught that? I don't think that's so easy. But I think it's where you should land is exactly what we're trying to do with Transferable Everything, which is to use athletics and the broader world as a form of education. And you have to be intentional with that, because everything is a lesson. And again, some of us carry those things forward without realizing it. Some do it later in life upon reflection and hindsight. Some never do. But we have to recognize that as leaders, as coaches, as parents, we have a responsibility. Yeah, we're going to get it wrong sometimes and maybe a lot of time. And so we have to forgive ourselves, of course. But we have to try to be conscious and intentional about this.
Yeah.
And so I think the real answer is either as a coach or a parent, you have to spend some time either outsourcing your own development and education, reading books, listening to podcasts, going to seminars, or whatever you can do to increase your level of knowledge and awareness so you can bring that back to your athletes, or you're bringing in other educators, other speakers to speak to your athletes directly and you. So it's a one message for both the coaches, parents, and the athletes, and understand, and we've talked about this previously, that athletics can be that form of education, but you need something to sort of like complement it in parallel.
Right.
So you have your training session, you have all the things you're exploring, but then is there a way, and again, this is where Transferable Everything is intended to be, this complementary way of evaluating everything you're learning and determining what can carry forward, what should I leave in the past in that domain, what should stay there, and what will serve me into the future, and what serves as a lesson.
Sure.
That's a beautiful lesson, in the potential of compromising your values. Because whether you carry that forward with you or not, if someone teaches you that makes sense to even a 12-year-old. They're like, hey, this makes sense here for you to raise your hand. But if you compromise your values outside of this, here's a scenario with your friends or your family, even they can see that well, that's not a good outcome.
Right.
So, okay, it applies here, it doesn't there. Okay, thank you, sort of pseudo helping them sort the wheat from the chaff and bucket things. So I think that's how you do it. And I think that's why this has become so important to me is that, we're not seeing this in education all that much of like how to think, reflect, to sort things out. And we talked about this on that podcast. Parents are struggling to have enough time. Two income households is the standard now, which means less time per se parenting children and making this form of education, virtue, character a focus. More and more prevalence for coaches on winning games and being evaluated based on that. So the sort of like almost the whole community around children has kind of morphed. More screen time, more exposure to social media and the outside world, less of these things in the school system, less time with parents because of dual income necessities.
Sure.
And it's not to anyone's fault. It's just the incentive structures that exist. And so I think when we reflect on our family or our role within society or domain, we have to think beyond just ourselves as well of what is everyone else's incentive structure around my child's development and considering those things. And if you're missing something, then put in guardrails. You can't be all things. And so bring in a book that your players can read. Bring in a speaker. Take them to a seminar that can explore this in a complementary way and help them to think differently.
I think reflection is important. What I'm wrestling with is like you said, there's so many different sources of information that anybody is being bombarded with at any given time. Obviously, those sources of information have some degree of influence, whether we decide to latch onto it or discard it. What things do I carry with me? What things do I not carry with me? Like we were talking about earlier, do I know if it's a correlation? Do I know if it's a causation? If I'm that player who's always throwing his hand up every time, maybe I'm just lucky in that I'm on a team that never loses. And so maybe some of these things that are building within me, I am attributing directly to my success. I've never experienced failure, so I have no reason to believe that what I'm doing isn't a contributing factor. And then so you start to build up misinformation or potentially your ego as well. There are going to be fringe cases where it's particularly difficult for someone to reflect because they're a winner. They always win.
Yeah.
There's no need for it. And hey, good for you.
Where do you see, so if we consider like the Socratic method and sort of utilizing that within your own typically we think of the Socratic method in conversation, but it's also applicable in your own sort of self-reflection and analysis. How do you see that method playing out?
You mean just like how I reflect?
Yeah, or like, do you see an importance of that? So for example, I can't remember if we directly spoke about this on the education side, but like, it wasn't until much, much later in my life that I learned what the Socratic method even was. And so like back to language, I think that would be a great thing for a young developing person to learn what the Socratic method is in of itself. So you can use it in conversation with others and in this case, in your own self-reflection.
Yeah, I've noted in previous podcasts about how like I've got the gift of curiosity. I'm always asking why or clarifiers just because I'm hungry for information. And like the same can be true when I'm looking inwards and trying to figure things out. But what happens first is that something causes me to assign importance to a thing, and then it goes from there. So it's not necessarily always a positive thing either. Like it could be goal-oriented, and I could have failed on my quest, failed thus far. Like if it's worth it enough for me, I'm going to keep going. But I hit a roadblock or I hit a success. Am I always assigning importance to that particular vector and reflecting? Maybe not always. And I can't say I always know what that trigger is for me. Surely if I've been upset by something, that's a very clear trigger that I need to figure out what's going on. And so often that is the spark for self-reflection.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good example because you're highlighting some sort of differences in the thing that sparks or creates the onset for the self-reflection. And so in terms of, a second ago I was talking about the Socratic method, and I think you can use the Socratic method to help someone uncover what their trigger might be. Where do they begin? And really, the Socratic method is just asking a lot of questions. So to your point, it's being curious.
Right.
And so if I'm the coach, whether I'm your executive coach, I'm your athletic coach, I'm your life coach, whatever the case may be, fundamentally, my job is just to help you discover things about yourself.
Okay.
And point them out to you. So I would use, or I would suggest, the Socratic method, asking enough questions in a curious way to help you explore your own mind and figure out, well, what are the triggers that make me self-reflect? And then you can add intention to say, well, I think it's probably good that I reflect a little bit more. I'm going to subscribe to this framework and I need a little more self-reflection. Okay, so let's get to a place where I know that if I do this and this, there's going to be an onset of now self-analysis and self-reflection.
Right.
And so I think that's where, not to bring it back to the previous podcast about education, but it's a reminder more broadly for parents and coaches and everybody that like education is something we do every day. School is a place we go to in a fixed classroom with a teacher, and we learn a curriculum, a dedicated curriculum.
There were certainly days where I went to a place of learning and learned nothing.
And of course. And that could be the curriculum's fault, it could be the teacher's fault, and it could be the individual's fault.
Sure.
All of those things are true. But education is something that we should be thinking that we commit to. And so the Socratic method is just like, it's low-hanging fruit for me in the sense that, if you're listening to this and you don't know what it is, Google it. Be curious. Ask questions. Think about how this can show up in your life. How can I apply this in conversation? How can I use this to help my children, those that I work with? How can this benefit others around me? And it's just asking questions.
Sure.
And then using that within yourself.
And I think a good takeaway, both for ourselves and for anybody who's listening, is think about what those questions might be. And I say that because there are individuals who may want to employ some sort of line of questioning, but they don't even know where to start. They don't know what the fundamental questions they should be asking themselves are. Is that something we can distill or provide guidelines for? I wouldn't say we should etch it in stone completely. But like, if we're talking barrier of entry, making self-reflection accessible through the Socratic method, where can you start as far as a line of questioning goes?
So I think there's so many resources now. They're infinite. You could Google Socratic method, self-reflection. What are good questions I should ask of myself in this scenario? You could ask pretty much any AI, LLM, what are some good questions? Not that you have to do exactly what they're prescribing, but they're examples that you can explore. And look at multiple places, not one single LLM, not just Google. Ask a friend. Look out for resources. Transferable Everything website is going to have some free resources on questions, reflective questions, the Socratic method that you can have. It doesn't mean you have to go there, but there will be examples. And I think outside of the broader curriculum, a lot of people have been trying to put these things out there. So the resources are there. You just have to look for them. You have to seek them. You have to want them. And you have to be intentional about that. But I don't think we're starved of resources for any level of accessibility. You just have to want it.
With the amount of information is available, how is a novice in this sphere supposed to choose the correct one?
Yeah,
and not be misled?
That's a really good question. I think there's different ways of taking this approach. There's one way where you could try every avenue and then find some consistencies. That would be a bit more of like a correlation approach, right? Where you've tried an LLM, you've Googled, you've looked at a psychologist's, newsletter that has put out, these level of questions. You've sought help if required from a professional. That's something that's critically important if you need it. There's tons of them, and you'd probably see some consistencies and some through lines, and so you can kind of pay attention to those. You can buy journals that may have been created by professionals or people who partnered with professionals, and so their name or their license is sort of standing behind it. And that's kind of one approach. And another approach is to sort of, in broader terms, the world of mass information, is there are some people that are attempting to filter down information for people. It's almost like this new niche of like, the internet's created, we have all this information, it's taken away jobs, but now all of a sudden new jobs are created because people become sort of like conduits and filters of information. And so you have to do some due diligence and pay attention to their consistency. This is maybe more applicable for like, say, news reporting and things like that. But you can find journalists independently that, not that you agree with their position, but you think are objective. If we return to the like surrounding yourself with people who are objective, by paying attention over time, and then you can sort of reasonably think, oh, they've recommended this thing. Well, they've demonstrated to me, they've shown me evidence over and over and over again that they're consistent in their logic, they're objective, they clearly are seeking the truth. So that seems pretty reasonable that I could trust them on this because they've built their credibility with me.
Right.
So those are kind of two ways that I think you can kind of take that approach. And at least here in Canada, my understanding is, anyways, you could reach out to your doctor and ask for resources. Even if they're not a mental health professional, they'll be more than happy to put you in touch with a mental health professional.
Right on.
And that doesn't mean that you're saying like, okay, I'm in crisis, I need help.
Sure.
If you are, please get help. Talking is one of the most important things. But if it's just for like information purposes, you can still do that. I think often we forget that, like, we almost feel like we're sitting down here and there's a responsibility of institutions or something that they're just supposed to feed me the information and know when I need it.
Right.
But that's not the case. That's the extreme ownership. It's my job to seek the information, to ask questions and say, hey, I'm interested in self-reflection. Can you kind of help point me in the right direction?
So we've used the one example of the individual with maybe too much ego.
Okay.
And how maybe where they can be self-reflecting, but in this example, they ask the question, but the answer is shallow because they're not really reflecting. There's kind of an ego component where there's some reflection, but it's surface level.
Sure.
So they're like, here's my answer, let's go. But ignoring that individual, I want to talk about the person with self-esteem issues.
Okay.
Who potentially can ask as many deep questions as possible and maybe even be too critical, but doesn't trust the answer that they're giving themselves. I think, like, to your point about seeking help, there are some circumstances where we do get into that territory. But if it's not, I don't know if pathological is the right word, but seeking correct mentors we've spoken about, I think, can be particularly important in those scenarios because certainly a tendency towards extreme self-criticism or self-esteem issues is going to prevent you from being able to have an honest Socratic dialogue with yourself.
Sure. I think first, like, of course, recognizing that, and that's where, like, that's the surface level of self-reflection is like, can I go deeper? And starting to ask some of those questions of yourself. And of course, so much courage and humility gets baked into that.
Yeah.
And so I think, surrounding yourself with those people, but seeking mentors is one of the greatest hacks, that probably in the past, I don't even know. I was going to say in the past 20 years, things like life coaches and stuff has really kicked off, but I think it's actually existed so much longer than that.
Just not in the hyper-marketed way it is today.
Exactly. But it really is a hack. And of course, there's people that get filtered in there that are sort of like grifters and stuff like that. But if you can find the right one, they can be a tremendous help. Because, if you want to be a great soccer player, you want to find a coach who has the skills, the tools to help you get there, maybe because they were once there themselves, or they've at least studied it, they've dedicated their life to studying that thing. And so if the same thing is true there, the same thing is true in aspects of our life, or like business coaches. Life coaches is obviously very broad. It's probably better to find someone that maybe specializes in a little more specific to the thing that you might be working on, like self-reflection. And, they can help you accelerate through that, and they can point out things that maybe you didn't even know. So I recently went for a massage physio kind of session, and I thought this part of my arm, which we were talking about before, was in a lot of pain, and where she began was in my back, and it was even more painful. and to me, the symptoms were showing up in my arm, in my forearm lifting, and it's been quite painful for a couple months. I didn't realize that it's beginning in my back. I needed somebody, a professional, to help me with that.
Right.
Now, I've gone to other physios and massage therapists that wouldn't find that. So just because someone has the title of a thing, which is kind of a big premise of Transferable Everything, does not mean, and also someone who's not a physio or a massage therapist could also have done enough reading and research and understood that that's where they need to look.
Right.
So one doesn't guarantee the other, but these are the things that you want to be looking for, is somebody that can help you on your journey of discovery. The same way I don't know enough about my anatomy and can be a little bit tricked, I seek help. This is painful. I tried doing as much as I could to roll it out, and I have suction cups at home and to put some heat on it, and I sort of exhausted my toolbox of knowledge. Now it's time for somebody else to come in that I trust, because I've been going to this person for quite some time.
Right.
For other scenarios, I have evidence of success over and over again, and I show up and I explain everything, and she immediately goes to my back. What are you doing? My arm hurts. Obviously, I didn't say that because I know and I have this level of trust.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the same thing.
I'm trying to work through what the preconditions are for genuine self-reflection. And I think we've hit it in a number of different ways.
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier, just wanting a truthful interpretation of something. That's a prerequisite.
Yeah.
So there's a level of honesty and humility that needs to be deployed in order to self-reflect.
Yes.
In addition to curiosity, I guess.
Yeah.
Or if you want to be deliberate about it, you can be like, hey, here's a thing. It's real. I got to figure that thing out. And then it starts with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are necessary. And this is why I wanted to structure the podcast in this way. As a reminder for everybody, we're kind of working through a literal chapter in the book that's not yet published, and making sure that the ideas are as represented, are accurately represented to what the intention is as much as possible. And I think some of these preconditions aren't. And so it's a good opportunity to return to the book and make sure that it really is. Because we've said this a million times, but we want to ensure that the barrier of entry and accessibility for reading the book, for the TE framework, is as low as possible. That anyone at almost any stage of their life can get there. And I think that's the way we've landed on it today, I think, is probably the best thing between curiosity and the commitment to truth.
Yeah.
If you can just do those two things, then you can start. And so let's leave this and close this out on reminding everybody that, despite some of the examples that we've shared or we've used, and I'm absolutely speaking for myself, most of these lessons are learned from hard things where I failed, not positives where everything went well. And so it's okay to fail. And we're going to talk so much more about this in the chapter on failure and forgiveness. But I just think it's an important reminder each step along the way to remind everyone that, even if you add these preconditions, and even if you're intentional about this, you are going to fail on the journey. You're going to fail to live up to the standards that you hold for yourself. And perfection is not what we're trying to achieve.
Right.
It's just the intention to try and to keep going and to be better today than yesterday and better tomorrow than today.
Right.
it doesn't matter how much, just a bit better. Tomorrow might feel like a step back from today, but if it's taught you a new lesson that you've not yet learned, then you are further ahead. And so I just want to remind everybody that it's okay. And in fact, it's necessary to fail.
Right.
And as you're reflecting, please don't carry the weight as if it's this tragic moment. It can be, like any success, a beautiful moment and an opportunity to thrive through this new lesson, this new understanding. And, of course, be cautious to not try and make the same mistakes over and over again. And that's the point of reflection, is what did I learn from this? Can I distill this down into a principle? And can I file it away for later?
Right.
And try and draw on that as something new approaches. And that's why we want to get to awareness. Reflection is always after the fact. It's an after action report of something that's already happened.
Yeah.
Necessary on our journey to self-awareness. It's once we get to self-awareness that we can really focus on reducing the errors we have. And so it's just a part of the journey to get there. And we're kind of working through this systematically, one chapter at a time. And so those that have been listening or just listening for the first time, I want to express a deep amount of gratitude for taking the time to listen. Congratulate you on taking the time to look internally, to enter that inner citadel, and just encourage you to keep going and have the resolve and the bravery to keep fighting and keep exploring, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you hate what you're seeing. But I promise you, on the other end is a beautiful outcome that will still have dark moments.
Sure.
But you'll have the tools to navigate through them so much more effectively.
If I could add just one last thing.
Please.
Which is, I know most of us live incredibly busy lives, work, whatever other obligations we may have, families. Loads of us spend a lot of time on our phones or watching TV or browsing the internet. Oftentimes people will make dinner and sit down in front of the TV because they need something to distract them while they eat. I would encourage you to take at least one moment during the day where you can spend time with just yourself. If not, to just be with yourself. I consider that probably the number one prerequisite for self-reflection, is first of all allowing yourself to exist in the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I couldn't agree more.